Hey guys, this is an updated video with easier techniques on how to replace your front wheel bearings and your front CV axles. Let's get this thing started.
See that, guys? There we go.
For those of you guys who are new to this channel, my name is Carl, and this channel is dedicated to all things mods, DIY, and engineering for 2nd and 3rd gen Tacomas. So make sure you smash that like and subscribe button already. Do it now, guys.
Do it. Do it now.
And if you do like the content creation of this channel, we have a bunch of new products at the store. So make sure you check them out. Link in the description below.
We'll start with removing the front wheels.
Alright guys, a little bit more inspection. Here we are on the passenger side. Got a nice leak there on the CV boot, so there's definitely a tear. Probably see that when I'm pushing it. And here's the driver's side tear right there. So definitely need to replace these CVs as well. So I'll show this to you on the passenger side, and we'll start with removing this ABS sensor. 10mm bolt. I'll just twist it, rock it back and forth, and carefully pull that sensor out. Just like that. Be good to feed that bolt back in so we don't lose track of the bolts. Now let's undo this upper bracket here with a 12mm. Get that nice and loose. We'll feed that bolt back in after we undo this caliper here. And these are with 17mm. Should just come right out. I'll just rest it on a jack stand against the lower control arm. So let's undo this plastic bracket that holds that ABS sensor. So you have that caliper completely free. There we go. So for that, I just squeeze the sides of this with needle nose pliers and then use pry tool to pull it off. And now our caliper is completely floating. So gotta make sure we are cognizant of these brake lines so I don't tear them. Okay, luckily for my end, I did put some anti-seize in the back of this rotor, so this just came right off, no problem. Yeah, let's feed those bolts back in so we can keep good track of these things. Now let's pry off this cover. Go around my flathead screwdriver, which I actually ground down, so it's a thinner point. Just gonna go around, work that. Now let's take this cotter pin off. Switching over to pin punch. Get this off from the top. Now we'll take this retainer off and then let's hit it with some liquid wrench. Now let's take off this main nut with 35mm socket. Alright, wasn't too bad. And it looks like the CV's off of the spline. So now we can remove this wheel bearing. And let's get this dirt off of these bolts with 17mm. Just work it in there. Definitely got a lot of rocks in between there. Now, let's undo these bolts. So I undid those bolts as far as they can by pretty much finger. So I should be able to just hammer this outwards with my 5-pound sledge. It shouldn't be as difficult this time since I did put some anti-seize on those mating surfaces. Yeah, as you can see, now we have that gap, and then we'll just work this hammer around. And we're good. Yeah, it looks like that seal held up okay for the most part, but you can see there's a little bit of mud and debris that got in there. So really that's what happens when you do a lot of mudding. Okay, now let's undo this 19mm bolt on the bottom of the steering knuckle. This whole thing should be pretty much free. As you can see, that's loose. You should be able to move this out of the way. Yeah, look at that, that thing's floppy. Yeah, it looks like this ball joint's on its way out too. So I just finished the driver's side, and this one is definitely in much worse condition. Definitely got much more moisture that got into this. Look at that, look at all that mud. We have this steering knuckle pretty much removed. I have it hanging out like that, being held up by the ball joints, upper and the tie rod here. And we did do the same thing on the driver's side. So this one, just like the passenger side, this ball joint, the lower control arm is shot. And unfortunately, I did not buy a lower control arm assembly at the time of the first inspection. So I definitely am going to replace this, but we'll work on at least replacing this CV. As you can see, it's also pretty worn and floppy. So good time to replace this. And we'll replace the seals here and the seals on the diff. So we'll get all of that done before we work on the lower control arms. Tried a new technique, guys. It worked pretty well on the driver's side, so I'm doing it on the passenger side now. What I essentially did was I used some cinch strap to basically carry that caliper by the upper control arm so we can jack up the truck. And what I essentially did here was I increased the height on the passenger side and I lowered the driver's side so that the diff is tilted more to the driver's side. So that means when we pull out this CV, we'll have very minimal loss of the diff fluid. In terms of executing that on the driver's side, it worked out really well. So pretty happy with that. And now let's take off this CV. So all I'm doing is taking my pry bar, getting it into one of the grooves at the inner side of the CV, and then just I'll hammer from this end to push that thing out. See that? Now we're getting that to start separating. There we go. So there is our axle seal, and we'll use our handy dandy axle seal tool. And when you use this, you don't want to get that hook on the axle housing, so definitely just make sure you're feeling around there and you're not scraping against the metal. And that's what we got. Yeah, so she's leaking a little bit. Just wipe these surfaces down, clean up all the dirt off of there before we put in a new seal. Now I cleaned up those surfaces, dip my finger into this gear oil here and just work it around the seal to help it slip in. And then we'll just push it in by hand. as far as we can. Now I'm going to work this with my long extension actually, and then just lightly hammer it in. A little bit more on this side here. And here's what I mean, guys. You see, top surface of this seal has to be lined up with that inner lip, like right where my fingernail is right there. So that looks like it's seated properly, and now we can put in the CV. So here is the new CV axle, guys. Now there's a couple things we're going to be doing. First, we're going to remove this nut, see here, undo it, and flip it upside down. We are going to be using that as our hammering surface. We're going to put some wheel bearing grease around here and then start installing this back onto that front diff. Going to be using this Tim Ken wheel bearing grease. We'll just cover that whole surface. Here and here. Keeping the plastic bag on the CV so that we can keep it clean while we clean up the other surfaces. So that's somewhat in there. Going to take my dead blow hammer. I'm gonna push this by hand as far as I can, and then just take the hammer and just start hammering away. That's what we want to see. Now we can level the truck back up. So here's the steering knuckle, guys. We'll just take the seal off with our seal puller. Stuck in there a little bit. There we go. Now we could clean up all this crud in here. Just using a wire brush to get in there, get all that out of there. You could also hit that with some brake cleaner. Wipe that whole thing down with a rag. Will also be good to clean up that hole there too. Get in there with that brake cleaner. Now let's paint that area with our anti-seize. We are going to be putting the seal on here, and to make the seal assemble a little easier, just cover these surfaces with anti-seize, because it will also help with easier replacement in the future so that the metal surfaces don't end up seizing up together. So that's that inner surface there. I'm going to remove all the excess on the inner surface. We only want it on this inner lip. We'll do the same thing here, because this is where the wheel bearing is going to sit. Now we can hammer in our new seal. Just push it in as far as we can by hand, and just work the hammer slowly around. And here's the dust shield. We'll definitely want to brush off all this crud off that mating surface in front and at the back. And just like before, we'll paint this with our anti-seize. Here's the new wheel bearing. We'll just remove this O-ring for now, and then paint all these surfaces with the anti-seize as well. And we can put that O-ring back in. Now we can install that wheel bearing and the heat shield. The heat shield has to be oriented so that the cutaway is towards the rear, just like that. So we'll put the heat shield on the wheel bearing. basically put this whole thing together, as you see here. Okay, now we can take off this plastic that's protecting our CV. Now let's wipe down these bearing surfaces. We'll put wheel bearing grease on this inner surface here, and also on this rubber seal. We can also take our anti-seize and supply a little bit of anti-seize on the spline here. Now we should be able to make these two components together. A little bit of finagling. And for now, I am just going to tighten these two lower bolts on the bottom of the steering knuckle. A little bit of anti-seize on the CVs, and then we'll just finger tighten this too. This should pull the outer side of that CV outwards. Just do this by hand for now, because we are going to be torquing this later. Now we can snug these wheel bearing bolts down even further. I'm going to switch over the closed end of the wrench. I'm going to help a little bit with a extension. We really don't need to mash this down too much. And just like before, we're painting this surface with the anti-seize. Now here's the rotor, guys. I did brush off all the dirt and also put in more anti-seize there. Just didn't show it on camera. I'm sure you've already seen enough of me doing that. Put one nut on the bottom to basically just secure this thing in place as we put on the brake caliper. Now we can take off this caliper from the strap. Now we can snug it down with a 17mm. And this upper bolt is snug down with a 12mm. First, we can mount the line back in, just like that. Here's the ABS sensor. We'll just push it in. 10mm bolt to secure that ABS sensor. Okay, now let's torque down these bolts to 91 foot-pounds. So now let's torque down this main nut to 173 foot-pounds. I'm going to jam this screwdriver into the rotor, so that will act as the stop in order for me to spin this. Alright, now we can take this out, put in our retainer, and then put in our cotter pin. Put some more anti-seize here on this inner lip. Also putting anti-seize on the outer lip of this hub cover. And we'll just hammer in this cover. Now let's torque down these steering knuckle bolts to 119mm to 118 foot-pounds.
Now many of you guys might have a hard time removing that 35mm nut as well as removing that wheel bearing from the spindle. So make sure you check out my first video on this removal, because I do go into higher detail with removing those seized parts. Now you will also see in that video why I use so much anti-seize. Now lastly, I do want to mention why I am replacing the CVs along with the wheel bearing. Those CVs over time not only had the tears in the boots as well as the slop on the joints themselves, the bearing surfaces at the outer end of those CVs were getting really pitted and it was chewing up so many seals. So I think it was really just about the right time to replace those CVs. And replacing them, it's really not that bad as you see in this video. Anyways, that's a wrap for this video. Make sure you guys check out our store because that really helps us out. So, until next time, peace out everybody.